Well, good morning again. I was able to speak for the class period, and many of you were not in here, so I just want to let you know I'm really happy to be here with you this morning. And I'm a visual person, so I like to when I read passages, I like to kind of create those images in my mind. And sometimes, if I have a picture, that will help me. And so that's really going to kind of be the basis of what we talk about this morning. I'm going to share some passages of Scripture. Most of them are probably familiar to you, but maybe you'll see them in a different way this morning, and they will impact you the way that they've begun to impact me in my life. So again, I'm happy that you're here. I'll have all of the Scriptures up on the screen, so if you want to turn to them, you can, but we'll just try to make our way through this. And I also just want to say thank you again. Some of you were not in here previously. You supported my work in Ethiopia, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that, and really how much the people there appreciate it. We are, tens of thousands of miles away, and yet this morning they were singing songs of hymns to God and praising Him just like we were. And so we are connected through the blood of Christ. And you are connected in a special way with some of those people because of your support of my work there. So thank you again for that. So we're going to look at some passages this morning, and I hope that these images will really they'll just make the Scripture come to life for us. So this will be our first one, Psalm 127, verses 4 and 5. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. So we read that and we say, well, what does that look like? Well, this is what it looks like. This is my family. I have four children, 2 daughters, 2 sons. I have 12 grandchildren, as Dave mentioned earlier, and I have number 13 on the way. So we've got an even 6 and 6, and a little girl is going to break the tie, so we'll have 7 and 6. But again, this is kind of what I'm meaning by talking about reading a passage and saying, well, okay, a quiver full of arrows. What does that mean? Well, of course, we know what a quiver is. A warrior would put the quiver on their shoulder, and then they would put their arrows in it. And the more arrows they had, the better chance of success that they had. And so I should be way more successful than I am based on how many arrows I've got in my quiver. But anyway, so that's just kind of our starting off point for us to be able to kind of get, this is where we're going with what we're going to talk about today. So the next passage is Matthew chapter 18, beginning in verse 1. At that time the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" When Jesus called a little child to him, he set them in the midst of them, and he said, "Assuredly I say to you, when we are converted and become as little children, you will by no means, unless you do that, you will be by no means entered in the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." As adults, we don't like to, we like to say, well, I'm not a child anymore. In fact, Paul even says, when I became a man, I put away childish things. But what Jesus is really talking about is the way that what our attitudes are, our ability to forgive, right? You remember when you were a child, or maybe you've seen it in your own household, where 2 of the children are just at each other's throats, and then 5 minutes later, it's like nothing happened. They had this ability to forgive that sometimes adults seem to forget how to do that. And a lot of different traits and characteristics that kids have. But so I'm going to share some pictures of you that help me to remember that I need to be like a child. I need to be mature for sure, especially spiritually. But there are certain ways in my life that I conduct myself that I have to be childlike, because that's what Jesus said to do. And the first one is to just be humble. So here's some pictures of children that have impacted me, and here's an older sister kind of comforting her little sister, and that's a trait that sometimes we lose as adults. This ability to just calm someone down and to comfort them. Sometimes we just don't want to get involved in other people's problems and other people's messes, but that's what we're here for. I mean, if we can't humble ourselves to help somebody who's in need, what's the purpose and what's the point? Here's just some friends, two of them are holding hands. The other one's very shy, and she's just standing there. But again, they're not seeking attention. Again, adults, we don't need to be seeking attention. We need to be serving the Lord and just kind of getting along with each other. And this is the Ethiopian version of Where's Waldo. It's pretty easy to find David in this picture. But these children are just full of life. They're full of joy. They want to investigate things and they want to discover things. And I think sometimes for me, I'm not going to speak for you, but sometimes for me, I just feel like I'm just too tired to learn anything else or to explore or to just, joy takes a lot of work, and I'm just not sure that I want to invest that. And then I have to remember, Jesus calls us to be like this. There's nothing worse for the kingdom than just having a grouchy, miserable Christian. I mean, that's really kind of a paradox, because when we think about what Jesus portrayed his people to be, it was to be joyful people, and we certainly can see that. We can certainly see that in children. Psalm 95, verses 1 and 2 say, "O come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving, and let us shout joyfully to him." And then in verse 6, he says, "O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep under his care." What does that look like? I mean, we read those verses and we are inspired by those verses, but do those verses actually move us to do anything about them? And thank you for those songs this morning. That was a wonderful song service, and we were singing with joy, and we were inspired to sing those words. It's because we are worshiping the God of the universe. And as the psalmist says, let us sing to the Lord, let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. This is not just checking a box, is it? This is something that's really vitally important, that we come together and we come to this place and we are unified in our voices and we are praising God. And as the psalmist says, we are bowing down before him. Now we can bow our heads, we can bow in our minds, but in Ethiopia, they take passages like this literally. And they get prostrate before the Lord and they bow down before him. Something else that they do that's quite interesting is we do a lot of preacher training classes, and there could be 150, 200, 250 men gathered together. And one of the things that they'll do is they'll sing. And I just tell them all the time, I said, if I got together 200 men in America, Christians, and I said, hey, let's sing, a lot of them would look at me like I had lost my mind. Now, women will do that. But sometimes the men aren't willing to do that. But here again is just this image for me of reminding me that when I go before the Creator, whether it's physically or whether I just do it in my mind, I am bowing down and I am honoring him as we sang this morning, he's my all in all. Mark chapter 14, beginning in verse 3. And being in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. And she broke the flask and she poured it on his head. But there were some who were indignant among themselves, and they said, "Why was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor." And they criticized her sharply. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why do you trouble her? Because she's done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, and wherever you wish, you may do them good. But me you do not have always. She has done what she could." I think a lot of times we get to the point where we just feel like, I can't teach a class. I'm not really good with children. I can't lead singing. I can't preach. I can't, and we start checking all these boxes of these things that we can't do. But I want to just remind us that all of us can do something in the kingdom. All of us. I'm reminded of a sweet woman who lived in Temple Terrace and worshiped with us at the church there in Temple Terrace. And every Sunday, she would ask the elders for a list of people who were not present at services. And she would write them a card and send it to them on Monday. And that was her work. That was something that she could do. I mean, she couldn't physically go and visit people and do that, but she could send them a note and let them know she was thinking about them and that they were missed at worship services. And then she was a severe diabetic, and she ended up, unfortunately, losing her fingers. And, anybody else would have just said, well, that's it, I'm done. There's nothing else that I can do. And what she did was she managed to figure out a way to get the phone receiver off of the hook. This is when we had like old-fashioned phones. And she would dial the number, and she would call all the people who had missed services that day and let them know that she missed them. There's something all of us can do. Well, we were going to a particular village, and they were preparing for the preachers to come, and the word had gone out, and so everybody was busy. Everybody was doing something, and they were preparing for us to come. And this little girl was kind of crying off to the side, and they, well, what's wrong? And there's nothing for me to do. I want to do something. And so in Ethiopia, particularly when you're out in the countryside, there's no road signs. There's no, drive until you get to, Meridian Avenue and make a right, and then go down here and make a left. There's none of that. And so what they said was, okay, here's what you can do. Go down to the road, and when you see the car coming, you wave them so that they know that that's where they're supposed to turn. And so she did, and so when we pulled up, that's what we saw. Our little girl in the red dress, and that's what they called on the phone. They said, you'll see a little girl in a red dress, and that's where you turn. And she was waving her hands and everything, and she was so excited because she was going to be able to do something. And so it's a simple message, right? Everybody can do something. And I don't care if you're 4 or if you're 40 or if you're 80. If you want to do something, reach out to the elders and say, I want to be involved. Give me something to do. And I promise you, they'll find something for you to do. And then you do it with all your heart. And you do it joyfully. I mean, she was so happy. In fact, when we turned, the roads are not that great. And then when you turn off the road, it's even worse. And she was just running ahead of us, just saying, they're coming, whatever the language. And we're driving behind her, and we can do something. So that's what the lady did for Jesus. He said, leave her alone. She's done what she could do. Isaiah chapter 49, beginning of verse 14. Isaiah says, but Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me, and my Lord has forgotten me. Can a woman forget her nursing child and not have compassion on the son of her womb? Surely they may forget, yet I will not forget you. See, I have inscribed you on the palms of my hands. You're with me continually, and you're before me. I want to use that second passage first. It used to be, and again, I'm showing my age here, but before cell phones and before all of that. In fact, in my house when I was a kid, we had a party line. I don't know if any of you remember those, but those were fun, right? You'd pick up the phone to make a phone call, but somebody else would already be on it. Not in your house, but somebody in the neighborhood, because you all shared a common line. I mean, what a nightmare that would be today. But on occasion, I might get a member of the opposite sex. I might get her phone number. And so I was somewhere with some friends of mine, and I met this girl, and I asked if I could have her phone number. It was a big step. And she said, yeah, sure. And so, of course, I just, I reached, my friend had a pen. I said, go ahead. And I just wrote it down. I don't think I washed my hand for a month because I didn't want to lose that number. It was important to me, and so I took the time to write it down where I could always see it. And that's exactly what God is saying in this passage. Zion, the Israelites had just been, they thought God forgot about them. He's not going to do what he said he was going to do. He's just left us to kind of languish in captivity, and we're never going to be restored because he doesn't even remember us anymore. And he said, that's not true. He says, look, I've written your names in my hand. You're ever before me. I'm not going to forget you. Then he says earlier in the passage, he says, can a woman who is nursing her child, will she forget that child? As I mentioned, I've got 4 children. And when my first child was born, my daughter, my wife was not able to nurse because she had some infections and she just couldn't get past them, and so she was unable to do that. Well, second child came along, and she would have nursed the second child, but she had a cleft lip and palate. So she didn't really have the ability to nurse. So the third child came, and it was a son, and there's no problems with infections, and he was fine, and so he was able to nurse. And I will tell you, there is a bond that is between both of my sons and my wife that my daughters do not share. It doesn't mean she loves them less, but what it means is she had this intimate relationship with them as they nursed on her breast. And that's what God is saying. That's the kind of relationship that I have with my people. It's as if I am that nursing mother, and I'll never forget you. You know, in Ethiopia, it's very common for women to feed their children wherever they are. If they're on the bus, if they're at church, if they're in their house, whatever it is, there's no shame associated with it. There's no, oh my goodness, it's just the reality. And so when you see that kind of an image, and when you see how powerful that is, and then you think about what God said about us, you think that woman will ever forget that child? Of course not. So when we get down and out, and when we get hard on ourselves, and when we are overwhelmed maybe with something that's in our life, and we just think, well, God's forgotten about me anyway, I promise you, He hasn't. He remembers, just like a nursing mother remembers. He remembers because He has your name written on the palm of His hand. Luke chapter 5. It happened on a certain day as He was teaching that there were Pharisees and teachers of the law sitting by who had come out of every town of Galilee, Judea, and Jerusalem. And the power of the Lord was present to heal them. And behold, men brought on a bed a man who was paralyzed, whom they sought to bring in and lay before Him. When they could not find how they might bring Him in because of the crowd, they went up to the housetop roof, and they let Him down in a bed into the midst before Jesus. Mark's account in his gospel says there were 4 men who were bearing Him to Jesus. And I want you to just think for a moment. This picture, we were driving along, and I just had to take this picture because I was just mesmerized by what was happening. I thought that this was a dead body, honestly. And I thought, well, they're just taking him for burial, and they're going to meet up with a crowd of people, and they're going to have some kind of funeral or whatever. This man was sick, and he was wrapped because, they thought he might be contagious, and so they wrapped his head and everything. He had a fever, and he was sick, and so. But they were carrying him to the hospital. And when I say hospital, don't think about our hospitals here. I mean, it's basically a small little clinic, very understaffed, not a lot of really good equipment and things. But they walked. I think what the total that they said that they were going to have to walk was 8 miles, carrying another human being on their shoulders. You think they cared about that man? You think that they really wanted him to get well? Of course they did. They were pulling out all the stops, and they said, "Okay, we got to walk 8 miles." You can see they've got a couple of guys behind them, so they had some backup. But they were going to be able to go and to take this man to a place where he was going to get healing. That's how much they cared about this individual. Now we look at that passage in Luke, and it's really the same scenario, right? They have a friend. He's sick. They've heard about Jesus, and they go and they can't even get in. So I think sometimes we would just say, well, you know what, we tried. We're just going to, it's too many people. We'll just try another day. No, they said, we're going to figure this out. And so they went on the roof. They dug back the roof. It was probably some kind of earth that was on top of some wood. And they made a hole, and they lowered him down right at the feet of Jesus. Now, that's impactful. I mean, it helps me to understand that passage a little bit better. But I want to kind of take it a step further, and I want to ask you just to think about it in your own mind. Who was it? Who was one of the four, or maybe it was just one, who carried you to the feet of Jesus? It could be your parents. It could be your grandparents. It could be a friend. It could be a college roommate. It could be a coworker. No telling who it is, but somebody thought enough of you, and they thought enough about me to make sure that I got in front of Jesus. And I want you to think about that person, and that person may not even be alive anymore. But here's what I want to ask you to do today, maybe tonight before you go to sleep. If they're not alive, I want you to pray to God, and I want you to praise Him and thank Him for putting that person in your life. And if that person is still alive, one of those people that brought you to the feet of Jesus, I want you to contact them. And I want you to thank them. And tell them what that meant to you. The fact that they cared about you so much that they were going to make sure that you had a relationship with Jesus. And then maybe when you see a picture like this or you read that passage again, that'll remind you to thank Him again. It is the most important gift that anybody can give us. That is to introduce us to the Lord. Matthew chapter 13. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid. And for joy over that, he goes and he sells all that he has and he buys that field. And again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, who when he had found a pearl of great price, he went and sold all that he had and he bought it. I used to watch a lot of ESPN, and it actually created a problem in my house because I was watching too much television. And so I literally took my cable box and I brought it back to the cable company because I thought, I have to wean myself of this. This is too much. And I turned it in, and the lady goes, oh, does it need to be replaced? Is it broken? I said, no, I'm just turning it in. And you could tell nobody had done this before. She said, well, what do you mean you're turning it in? She said, are you going with another company? I said, no, I'm turning this in and I'm going off of cable. And she looked at me like I had leprosy or something. Like, why would anybody do this? And I said, I'm just watching too much TV, and it's causing me problems. But one of the things that struck me that I was watching too much ESPN is I was sitting there one night and I was watching the National Poker Championship. Now, first of all, that's not a sport, right? I mean, I don't think it's a sport. It's a game, but it's not. I mean, maybe if it was full contact poker or something, that would be pretty cool. But this was just poker. And I thought, what am I doing? Why am I watching this? But one of the things that fascinated me about that is it always happened, right? You've got the people sitting around the table, and you've got this guy that's got this massive amount of chips. And then he just shoves them all in the middle. What do they call that? Anybody remember? I'm all in. I mean, he's at the point now where he's just like, dude, I'm going to win this. And think of how much more I'm going to win. So I am shoving everything in. I'm all in. Isn't that what Jesus is talking about? You know, the guy that found the pearl of great price, the guy that found the treasure hidden in he said, you know what? This is it. I'm going to buy this field. I'm going to buy this pearl because this is it. And so he spent everything that he had on it. It was that important to him. In our earlier period this morning, I talked about an individual. I showed a picture of a man and his son. His name is Sagai, and he's got a young son. And I'm going to tell you a story with pictures about Sagai, and it's a story about being all in. So Sagai lived in the Awasa area. He was actually out in kind of a village outside of the city of Awasa. So he was remote. And he heard that if he could get to Hosanna, there was a man there, and it was a man who was a preacher, and he had heard a lot of good things about this preacher, and he thought, well, if I can just go there, and then if I can just travel to his house and I can find him, I'm going to invite him to come to my village, and so that he can preach to us and that we can hear what he has to say. And so Sagai doesn't have much at all. But he had just a very small amount of money that he had kind of hidden in his house. And he sold a couple more things to some neighbors, traded a few things, and then he took that money and he made his way to the bus stop, and he took a bus to Hosanna. And he spent all of his money to take this trip, because he was going to go and he was going to find Marcus. Marcus is an amazing man by all accounts. He's been preaching the gospel for over 50 years. They quit counting after he baptized over 3,200 people so far in his teaching. And so everybody knew who Marcus was. And so he said, well, I need to go and I need to see Marcus. Well, one thing you need to know about Marcus is that Marcus, his mode of transportation was a donkey. That's all he used, because he lived in the mountains and he couldn't take any kind of vehicle. No four-wheel, no two-wheel, nothing would really get him where he needed to go. But a donkey could do that. And so that's where he went. And he continued using a donkey until about 5 years ago, when he had so many problems with his legs and his back, he couldn't do it anymore. But Sagai was in search of Marcus. So he gets on the bus and he takes the ride to Hosanna. Now, I don't want you to think Greyhound, and I don't want you to think like luxury liner. These are buses that get full of like 60 people. There's people hanging off the sides. There's stuff on the sides. This is early morning in Hosanna. Unfortunately, I'm taking this from the balcony of the room I was staying in, and they get going about 4 a.m. So they start at the buses, and there's all this activity, and it's loud and everything. Well, anyway, Sagai takes the bus, and he takes it to the bus stop in Hosanna. He gets out, and he starts walking. And he has to walk for about 4 hours, because he's looking for Marcus's house. And this is Marcus's house. They call it a roundhouse. It's very simple. It's a structure. You see a cow there standing outside. At nighttime, because of predators, they bring the animals inside the house. So it could be chickens, it could be a cow, it could be a goat, it could be multiple animals, but they all come inside at night because they don't want them to get taken by the predators. And so he walks, and he walks, and he walks, and he walks for 4 hours, and he finally gets to where the village is that Marcus lives. And he says, where can I find Marcus? And they say, well, that's his house over there. So he goes over, he knocks on the door. Nobody answers. Pounding on the door, nobody answers. Well, Marcus was gone preaching. He wasn't there. And his wife was there. And so she very sheepishly, she goes to the door, and he's pounding on the door, and he's Marcus. Well, in Amharic, there's a lot of different dialects. And so they weren't really connecting. I mean, she heard the name, but she didn't know the man, and so she was not about to open the door. And she told him to go away. He's not here. Go away. And he was pleading with her. Please, I need to speak to Marcus. No, he's not here. Go away. When's he coming back? Go away. He's not here. She was afraid. And so after pleading for about an hour, he starts to walk back. Well, now, it's starting to get dark. It's kind of dusk, and there's predators out there, right? He's just walking. walking back to the bus station. Another 4 hours in the dark, he gets back to the bus station. And in the meantime, I guess I can back it up. Marcus comes home, and his wife is beside herself, and he's like, calm down. What's happening? Well, there's a man was here, and I couldn't tell what he was saying, but he kept saying your name, and he said something about gospel and this and that, and Marcus said he was looking for me, and he said gospel, and she said yes, and he said, okay, I gotta go. So he gets back on his mule. It's the dark of night, right? And he rides back to the bus station. And this guy is just kind of sitting on the side of the road under a tree, weeping. Because he doesn't know how he's going to get home now. He spent everything just to get there. And now he can't get home. So he doesn't know what he's going to do. Well, Marcus rides up on his mule, gets off and asks who he is. Were you looking for Marcus? Yes, I'm looking for Marcus. Well, I'm Marcus. He says, I want you to come and I want you to preach to my family and to my village. And Marcus says, we'll do that. The next morning, Marcus bought 2 bus tickets for Owasso, and they rode to Owasso, and the rest is history. So the guy's a faithful preacher. His family are all believers. His village are believers. Sagai was all in. He didn't just say, you know what, I hope that one day Marcus comes this way and I can meet him and maybe he can teach us. He took every opportunity and every bit of money that he had, and he just said, I'm gonna figure this out. And he was all in. It's a great passage. We've heard it many times. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I am meek, and gentle, and lowly in heart. You will find rest for your souls, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. There could be somebody here this morning who's never made the decision to go all in. And so I just want you to think about Sagai, and I want you to ask yourself: Are you ready to make that kind of commitment to Jesus? Because you have to go all in. I'm not proud of this, but there have been many times in my life when I've not been all in. There have been plenty times in my life when I've been a hypocrite, when I've claimed to be one thing, but I was really living a different way. And Jesus says, if you are truly tired and if you are weary and you want some help, you come to me. And so that's the question for us this morning. And there actually is a second category of people too. And that is, maybe you've made that commitment already, but you're not all in. And I just want to encourage you, that's not a good way to live. Jesus wants it all. He wants everything that we have. And here's the reality. Paul says, eye has not seen and ear has not heard, nor mind been able to comprehend what God will do for those who love him. Do you love him? Are you all in? If you want to make that decision this morning and say, yes, I'm all in, we're happy to help you. We're glad to help you with that. Just let us know as we stand together.